All right, so 4.6 watersheds. So there's not a lot that you need to know about watersheds, but College Board likes to include questions about watersheds all the time. So let's just go over the few things that you do need to know and why they're important, and then that'll pretty much be it for this for these notes. Okay, so all of the land watersheds are basically all of the land that drains into a specific body of water. So when it rains, all of the land in an area where the water moves into, let's say, the Ohio River or the Chesapeake Bay. That's like a very famous watershed that AP College Board likes to talk about. So it's either a river or a lake or a bay or whatever it is. All of that area, that land area, is called a watershed. So it's determined by the size, the length, the slope, the vegetation, and all of the plants that are present in an area. So here, let me move my picture for a second. But this just kind of shows you like all of this. It rains, and then all of this water is going to flow into this river, and so this would be this watershed. We also have some water that infiltrates into the ground and then becomes part of the groundwater, but that's basically essentially what a watershed is. So the vegetation that's in the watershed, the soil that makes up the watershed, the slope of the ground plays a very large role in how all of these things actually play a very large role in how um, watersheds drain. So if there's more vegetation, there's going to be more infiltration, more water going into the ground, and there's going to be more groundwater recharge. That's why there's a lot of, if you're in a very flat area with a lot of farmland that's not being sustained well, then you can end up with a lot of runoff, a lot of topsoil that kind of leaves the area and gets into the water and causes lots of problems. And we'll talk about that more when we get to Unit 8, when we talk about water and land pollution. And then if there's a greater slope, there's a lot more velocity. The water's moving at a much faster speed, and that can lead to more soil erosion, which isn't a good thing as well. And then also the soil permeability, which we've talked about in this unit in 4.3, also kind of determines, and that infiltration rate also determines how much runoff there's going to be. Okay. And then lastly, human activities of a watershed impact the water quality. So for instance, agriculture, like we've mentioned, clear cutting, which is taking down, or deforestation, taking down the trees, urbanization, urban cities spreading out. When we put in a lot of concrete and roads and infrastructure, that actually stops the infiltration from happening and the recharging of the groundwater from happening, and that's an issue. Dams can impact the water quality, and mining. So all of those human activities, we will talk about each of those actually throughout APES. So it'll be important that you know more about that later. Okay. All right. So again, the Chesapeake Bay watershed, this is just something that they like to talk about. And I'm going to stop my webcam again. There's a 6-state region that drains into a series of streams and rivers that eventually make its way to the Chesapeake Bay. And the Chesapeake Bay is just a really well studied ecosystem. It's large. It's on the East Coast where there's a lot of people, and so it's just kind of like one of our more famous watersheds that we like, that AP College Board likes to ask questions about. But basically, it's a mix of fresh and salt water, and then all the nutrients that are in the sediments that are flowing into that habitat. There's a lot of salt marshes on the East Coast around the Chesapeake Bay as well. This makes the Chesapeake Bay a really productive ecosystem. Okay, so I used to live in the state of Delaware, and this looks like a picture I could have taken. Like, just I could have walked down the road and taken a picture of this. I lived on a marshes basically, and so at the school that I taught at, a lot of students used to miss school when it rained a lot because their roads were completely flooded, and the only way they could get to the mainland was to take a boat. So we didn't make them come to school on those days, but estuaries and wetlands like this provide a lot of ecosystem services, which we're going to be talking about when we discuss Unit 1. So there's a lot of tourism revenue with hotels, restaurants, etc. There's a lot of water filtration. which actually traps pollutants, which makes that's a good thing to get those pollutants out of the water and into the plants. And then there's a lot of habitats for food sources like fish and crabs. Storm protection from a lot of storm protection from hurricanes or just really bad tropical storms or whatever. And so you can see here, this is what it looks like to live in that Chesapeake Bay watershed, or like when I lived in Delaware. They love to eat blue crab, lots of water sports and water activities as well. And so the human impacts on the Chesapeake Bay include, or any watershed actually, include nutrient pollution. So a lot of nitrates and phosphates that are leading to eutrophication. We're going to talk a lot about eutrophication later. So I'll kind of leave that for then. But basically what eutrophication is an algae bloom, like a big, large growth of algae that increases because of all the fertilizer, the nitrates and the phosphates. That's what makes up fertilizer. There's decreased sunlight, and then plants below the surface actually die off because the algae is blocking the sunlight from getting to them. And then the bacteria that are in the water actually use up all of the oxygen because they're trying to break down, they're feeding on all of those plants that died. And so they eat up all of that oxygen that's in there. And then that causes low oxygen levels in the water. So fish and things can't live there now. And so this creates what we call a dead zone where fish can't live, or just not even fish, but all of the animals that live in that ecosystem can't live there anymore. So eutrophication is a very bad thing. And it was happening tremendously and still can be a problem in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, but also in watersheds throughout the country. So major sources of nitrates and phosphates are discharged from sewage treatment plants. They actually dump not raw sewage, but treated sewage, which is high in nitrogen and nitrates and phosphates. They dump that into the water. There's a lot of animal waste that comes off of large animal meat production facilities that we're going to talk about later. They're called CAFOs. So again, we'll talk about those later. But animal waste produces a lot of nitrates and phosphates. Any farm that has a lot of animals can cause this waste, which has nitrates and phosphates. And then a lot of synthetic fertilizer that we put on our lawns. If you fertilize your grass, which if you live in a subdivision, you probably do, or agricultural fields, this can all lead to a large sources of nitrates and phosphates. Okay. And then other major pollutants include endocrine disruptors, which are chemicals that are used for sewage treatment, but also manufacturing. Those can get into the waterway and cause your endocrine system to not function properly. And then also sediment pollution. So if we have deforestation in an area or urbanization in an area, or we're not tilling agricultural fields properly, this can lead to a lot of sediments, a lot of soil getting into the waterway, which is called sediment pollution, which is not good for the ecosystem as well. This increases turbidity, which means the water gets really cloudy. You've probably seen water that's very cloudy after storms, especially because of the runoff of soil. And this reduces the amount of photosynthesis that can occur in the water. And then it covers over those rocky stream beds, which makes it difficult for organisms with gills to live in the areas that they like to live in. So that sediment is a huge problem, and that is a huge problem in the Chesapeake Bay and other watersheds throughout the country. So direct effects of clear cutting, soil erosion. We've already talked about that. Okay. Um, and then warm water, actually, I think the important thing, I think we've kind of talked a lot or some about some of these things before. You do need to know this. So this might be a good point to stop the video. I just don't want to read the slide, everything on the slide to you. But warm water can actually hold on to that sediment and make it, so like during the summer, it can actually make water more turbid. Turbid just means cloudy. Okay. So that's kind of important to know. And you can see this is an area where they're actually mining or going strip mining, have strip mined the land. And so when they claim that land, they turn it back into wild land, or more natural land. The soil's not as like firm, or it's not as rooted, I guess, to the ground, and then a lot of runoff can happen. So that's a problem. Okay, and you can see this is an area that was deforested, and again, the same thing. The soil is just going to run into the ground or run into the waterways. And so this increases both soil and stream temperature. Okay, and so I'll let you kind of read through those slides. Again, that might be a good place to pause so that you can get some of that information in your notes. So here's some solutions. What can we do to stop the issues with human flourishment? Because urbanization, deforestation, these things are things that we need to do, but we need to do it in a more sustainable way. So to be more sustainable, here's some solutions that we could add to water to you know these watersheds to protect them better. Okay, so first of all, we have cover crops. Cover crops are crops that we just plant on the land to restore the nutrients within the soil. So that's really important. And plus, we have plants that are growing when we otherwise wouldn't be growing crops, and so that reduces the amount of erosion that takes place. Other things that we can do are include riparian buffers where we plant plants to hold the soil in so that erosion is not happening as much. We can have animal manure management where we're putting it into areas that store that manure and maintain it, much like we would create like a landfill. We would almost create a landfill for that manure to hold it in so that all that animal waste is not running into waterways. And then we can actually treat it so that we can use it for fertilizer, like a more natural fertilizer in the future. Spread it out so that it doesn't all go into the waterway at one time. All right, other things that we can do are create um, septic tanks that have better drain fields. So this is a way that folks in rural areas treat their sewage out of their house in a better, more sustainable way so that it's not running into the groundwater. That causes issues. And we can also have enhanced nutrient removal at sewage treatment plants, but also at, well, yeah, that's a sewage treatment plant so that we're removing some of those nutrients and using them in a more productive way instead of just dumping those nitrates and phosphates back into the waterway. So those are all solutions to watersheds. Okay, so here's your practice FRQ. Deforestation can affect water quality. Identify one change that can occur in the water quality of streams within a watershed that has been deforested. Explain how deforestation can lead to this change. All right, and so I will have the answer posted for you on OneNote. I think that's it for our watershed notes. If you have any questions, make sure you ask me in class or come see me during Pathways as a reminder. I'm always here in Pathways. And then our next set of notes is going to cover solar radiation and Earth's seasons. Okay, I'll see you guys next time.